All righty. So our Torah portion is called Shmini, which means eighth. It begins in Vayikra or Leviticus chapter 9, verse 1, and it goes over to the end of chapter 11. So I want to read verses 1 and 2 as we begin. It came to pass on the eighth day, Shmini, that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. And he said to Aaron, take for yourself a young bull as a sin offering and a ram offering as a burnt offering without blemish and offer them before the Lord. And so as I've already indicated, Shmini means eighth, and it's referring to the eighth day after Aaron and his sons had been inaugurated into the priesthood. I think everybody's familiar with the idea that the eighth day is often symbolizing a renewal of sorts. I've often heard the eighth day being referred to as a new beginning or things like that. But if it's not a renewal, maybe in this particular case, it's an initiation of a process that had begun previously. My view is, and this is my opinion, that Yeshua did ride into Jerusalem on a Sunday, the first day of the week. And that means that when he rose again on the following first day of the week, at the end of Shabbat, that would have been the eighth day since he went into Jerusalem. And so the resurrection occurred on an eighth day, as it were. It was this new beginning, if you will, this renewal. And so it's interesting, at least to me, that his emergence from the grave corresponds with the initiation of the priesthood, as we read here. And interestingly, this portion, as it begins, it's dealing with the preparations that Aaron and his sons had to make in anticipation of the fact that the Lord would appear. And we've talked about this every cycle, but I want to say it again. The text does not say, do this and he might appear. The text is saying, do this because he's going to appear. There are a lot of things that we need to take away from that, just that one idea, that there are things that we need to be doing, there are things that we need to be about, not because he might come, but because he is coming. And we don't want to get caught when the shout goes out, behold, the bridegroom comes, to find that our lamps are going out and we didn't think ahead to get some extra oil, and it's midnight and all the shops are closed, and by the time we do the things that we should have already done, the door is shut and we can't go into the wedding. So there are things that we need to be doing right now because he will appear. And it's going to happen when none of us are thinking about it. It's going to happen when none of us are anticipating. That's what he said anyhow. We're looking. Yeah, I understand that. But he said in an hour that you're not thinking about it. When these things are going to happen. So let's be prepared today. Let's do the things today we need to do. In fact, here's what Moses said to Aaron and to his sons, verse 6 of chapter 9. This is the thing which the Lord commanded you to do, and the glory of the Lord will appear to you. So once again, we do these things not so that he will appear, but because he is going to appear. Yeshua appeared to many on the eighth day. He appeared to those men who were on the road to Emmaus. In fact, they said, the Lord is risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. So again, there are these things that we must do in preparation for what we know is going to happen. And we've heard about it all our lives. At least I have. I grew up in church. We used to sing this song at the Pentecostal church I grew up in. It was called, "Oh, the Lord is coming back to earth again." You know, and all the verses were about doom and gloom, blood and guts, and all those kinds of things. And it kind of freaked me out, you know. I mean, it did. But then the chorus was, "Oh, but the Lord is coming back to earth again," you know. But I was always kind of, you know, when I would hear that. Well, it shouldn't cause us to cringe. It should cause us to prepare. It should cause us to take hope. But it should also cause us and provoke us to prepare, because the eighth day, as we see here, is a day where he appears. It's a day marked with God's glory. In Luke chapter 9, verse 22. Then Aaron lifted his hand toward the people after he's done all of the things that he's supposed to do, all the sacrifices. He lifted his hands toward the people. He blessed them with the Aaronic blessing. And he came down from offering the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offerings. And Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of meeting and came out and blessed the people. And then the glory of the Lord appeared to all of the people, and fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and they fell on their faces. There's a couple of things that jump out at me there. Number one, when his glory really shows up, nobody will have to convince you. I won't have to say anything. You won't have to say anything. Musicians won't have to say anything. When his glory really shows up, we'll know. Because everybody will be on their face. Right? The other thing that occurs to me here is this is a good fire that's coming out from the Lord. All right? And so this fire comes out from the Lord. It consumes all the offerings. And I didn't read it, but I want you to take note. In the text, as Aaron is going and offering these different gifts, that at least on 3 occasions, his sons are mentioned. They're assisting him with the presentation of these different offerings. And specifically, it says that they delivered unto him the blood. My point is that his sons were participating in this. His sons were part of what was going on. And his sons would have included Nadab and Abihu. And the point is, those 2 guys, and you know why we're mentioning those 2 guys, they were participating in the procedures that were related to the sanctuary, which then infers to me that they had been instructed what to do. And I don't think Aaron told them the wrong thing to do. I think, and I'm presuming here, makes sense to me, if they're assisting him with all these other things and the fire is going out from the Lord to consume the altar, that they have been instructed accordingly. So then, that amplifies what we read in chapter 10, verse 1 and 2. Then Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it, put incense on it, and offered profane fire, this translation says, some say strange fire, offered profane fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And so fire went out from the Lord again, and this time it devoured them, and they died before the Lord. And so, within just a few verses, the fire of God is manifest twice. And the first time, the offering was acceptable. The fire devoured the offering because it was acceptable. But the second time, it was to demonstrate that what they were doing was not acceptable. And so what do we learn from this? That there are some offerings that the Creator deems as acceptable, and there are offerings the Creator does not deem as being acceptable. In fact, some of them he finds rather offensive. And this is something that is revealed to us from the very beginning. Genesis chapter 4, verse 3. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering. A mincha is the offering, typically a grain offering. He brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his mincha offering, his probably grain offering. But he did not respect Cain and his mincha offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. And so the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen? If you do well," or can I put it this way, if you do the right thing the right way, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. So a couple things to point out here. I'm not going to expound too much on this, but I have for a very long time believed that what's going on here is that Cain brings an offering of the fruit of the ground, the mincha offering. Abel also brings a mincha offering, but he also, not instead, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat. In other words, Abel understood the importance of blood. He understood that blood had to be part of this. Now, where did Abel learn that from? His father. Okay? By the way, where did Adam learn it from? His father. That's exactly right. So you see the chain of command here? The Creator spoke to Adam. Adam spoke to his household. And now it's the responsibility of his sons to follow through with what their father has taught them. It would seem that Abel acknowledged what he had been taught and did what was acceptable. But his brother, Cain, doesn't do that. I don't believe it makes sense for Adam to call Abel over to the side and say, here's what you do. And then keep that from Cain. Doesn't make any sense to me. Cain would know the same things Abel would know. In fact, if there was any doubt about it, here's what the Creator says to him. If you do well, won't you be accepted too? You know what the right thing is. Do the right thing. But if you don't do the right thing, sin is waiting at the door, and it's going to pounce on you if you cross that threshold, so to speak, and not do the right thing. Of course, that's exactly what happened to it. So God taught Adam what is acceptable. Adam passed it down to his sons. But Cain is an example to us of someone who determines to do things his way. And beyond that, even when he is reproved, will not be corrected. And so because he would not be corrected, an innocent man dies, parents grieve, and he's forced to wander for the rest of his life. So then, compare that to what happens here in Leviticus chapter 10. On the same day that the Lord appeared, and everybody's worshiping, everybody's falling on their face, tragedy strikes. That's not the first thing I think of when I contemplate the glory of the Lord appearing. The first thing that comes to my mind is people worshiping, people on their face, people humbling themselves before him. It doesn't just automatically come to mind that on the day that the glory of the Lord appears, that tragedy strikes like that. But then again, if you think about it, what is the day of the Lord all about? Kind of sorting out who the obedient are from who the rebels are, right? Anyway, so tragedy strikes. These two offer what is unacceptable unto the Lord, kind of in a similar way to Cain. And I would think that they do this without regard for what they had been told. Moses seems to underscore this in verse 3. He said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy, and before all the people I must be glorified." So Aaron held his peace. And it doesn't tell us what Aaron was getting ready to say. It just said that he held his peace. So obviously there was something going on in his heart and mind that he would have liked to have said at that moment. He just saw two of his sons struck down before his very eyes. But he held his peace. Why? Because Moses reminded him, this is what the Lord said. This shouldn't come as a surprise. So I want us to meditate on that principle for just a moment. Because if we are to draw near unto him, we have to have clean hands and a pure heart, right? Renew in me a right spirit. There have been several times in the 4+ years that we've been getting together as a congregation that I really had to pray a lot before I got here. Because surprise, I'm human like y'all. I have bad days, and sometimes bad days stretch into bad weeks. I know that never happens to any of you guys, but it happens to me. So there have been many times that I've just, Father, I really don't want to get on that platform with the way I feel right now, what I'm thinking, how I'm dealing with things, da-da-da-da-da. And I have to really, really, really hear from him. And they used to use the term breakthrough, And sometimes it's maybe not a breakthrough, it's just a reprieve. Sometimes it's just the grace of God, right? But the point is that we don't want to come before him with the wrong things in our heart, And it's just really easy for us to justify those things that are in our heart. But if we want to draw near to him, and we do, right? I mean, not just words, right? That's really what you want. That's what's in your heart. Tired of what has been and all the same old, and all the talk. Tired of it. Done with it. Want something that's real, that's authentic. That God honors and he puts his mark of approval on to say, this is me. I'm blessing this. The fruit is, that's what we want, right? So if that's what we want, we must respect his holiness. Meaning, at least in part, we don't do the things that seem right to us. We don't do the things that may have been right at that other place and another time. How many times have you heard me say what was okay yesterday may not be okay today? And what was okay today may not be okay tomorrow. And I'm not just saying that to you, I'm saying it to me, to all of us. So if we're going to respect his holiness, we don't get to do the things that seem right to us. We have to do as he instructs us, regardless of what we think. And by the way, regardless of what somebody else thinks, regardless of what others are saying, we have to listen to his voice. I have to listen to his voice for my family, for me, for my family. You do too, as the head of your house. You have to hear his voice for your family, what he wants your family to do, where he wants your family to be. I have to hear his voice where he wants this family to be. And all of us collectively, we do as well. But the way it works is he's going to hold me and Beth responsible. You understand that, right? So when it comes right down to it, she and I have to do things, decide things, not based on what you think or what they think or what that one over there thinks or what that one over yonder thinks. We have to do what is he telling us to do. Well, Bill, I mean, that sounds kind of conceited. No, here's the deal. I don't look at myself as the head honcho. I look at myself as the guy who's going to have to give an account to God for what I say and what I let others say on this platform and what we let go on in here. I'm going to have to be accountable to him for that. He's not coming to you to hold you accountable for that. He's coming to me. So that's the way I'm looking at it. Did that offend you? Okay, just want to make sure. If it did, So with that thought in mind, maybe there are fires burning elsewhere. And we might deem them as acceptable. Let's be careful, though, because the fire that's burning over there may not be the fire he wants burning here. It might be that what you think is acceptable for that situation, to bring it in here, he might think it's something else. Does that offend you? I guess it did offend some. But that is how it is. So then, they brought strange fire. Do you think they intended that day to wake up, we're just going to tick God off? You think that was their attitude? I don't think so at all. I think they probably had very good intentions. Hang good intentions. I'm over good intentions because good intentions can create a lot of problems. Let's substitute doing things with good intentions with doing the right thing. All right? Y'all still love me? All right. So they offered this strange fire, this profane fire, and we want to know what it is. What was it exactly? I want to recommend to you, let's don't focus so much on what the form of it was. The function. What did it do? The Hebrew term is esh zara. Esh, aleph shin is the word for fire, or esh zara, zayin resh he. Zara is going to be the key word that we're going to focus on. Not zara, like pressure, even though they're related terms. They can kind of connect. It's a little different word. And it comes from a root word that means to be separated out, which is to say it's foreign. And if it's foreign, it has no rights here. Okay, if you are a citizen of the United States, you have certain rights, right? The way it's supposed to work is if you are not a citizen of the United States, you do not get to enjoy all the rights and the privileges of a citizen, right? That's the way it's supposed to be, okay? Well, in this context, what it's saying is this was a fire that they brought in that was foreign. It didn't belong there. and therefore, in a sense, it had no right to be there. This same root word means strange or stranger. Someone who is outside of the family, so to speak, but more to the point, this root word is related to the idea of turning aside from the path that you were on. So that means it can also convey the idea of going astray, being wayward, outside of the law of God. And so then I want to amplify the intent of this root word and share with you how David used it on one occasion. He's describing the wicked in Psalm 58, verse 3 and 4. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they are born, speaking lies. Their poison is like the poison of a serpent. So he is saying that the wicked are these who turn aside, they go from the path, and apparently, at least this is inferred, they use their tongue to try to lead others astray as well. The point is that strange fire can render death by causing you or I to turn aside from the path that we were set upon. You understanding what I'm saying? Okay. So what we're trying to do here is not figure out what it was, but to understand the principle behind it and what it had the potential to do. Because offering that strange fire is akin to doing what is right in our own eyes. And what does that lead to? There's a way that seems right unto man, but the end thereof is death, it's destruction. Now, everybody in this room and everybody watching knows there is a difference between right and wrong. Duh. But it's just as important to understand that there is a difference in doing the right thing the right way or the wrong way. Because we can try to do the right thing and end up doing the wrong way. But I had good intentions. Good intentions won't matter if Nadab and Abihu are dead. Right? I don't think that they intended to die that day. They were careless. But God is holy. And it goes back to my initial thought. If we truly want to draw near to his presence, we have to respect that he's holy. He's merciful. He's long-suffering. He's all of those great and wonderful things that we celebrate. Hallelujah. I'm glad he is. But he's also holy. And so carelessness, even ignorance sometimes, does not excuse us to do whatever we want to do in regard to his holiness, and especially if you're drawing near to him. In fact, in this story, loss and grief doesn't necessarily excuse us from responsibilities. Verse 6 of chapter 10. So Moses said to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar, his sons, do not uncover your heads nor tear your clothes, lest you die, and wrath come upon all of the people. Hey, guys, you're going to have to hold it together. Because if you do something you're not supposed to do right now, you're going to die, and wrath's going to break out, and all the other people are going to suffer for it too. That's a pretty big responsibility. But let your brethren, the whole house of Israel, bewail the burning which the Lord has kindled. You shall not go out from the door of the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die, for the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you. And they did according to the word of Moses. Aaron and his sons had to remain at their post regardless of the circumstances, in spite of the circumstances, because the anointing was upon them to do what God had placed them there to do. And at that point in time, anyway, it prevented them from mourning this loss. But notice this, and I've skipped over this a few times, and it's never really jumped out at me like it did this morning. But the rest of the congregation is going to mourn on your behalf. You remain at your post. The rest of the congregation is going to bewail the mourning. They're going to absorb the impact of what you're having to deal with right now. At least that's how it occurs to me. But now look at immediately after that, Moses then says this to Aaron in verse 8. Then the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. Pretty important. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may distinguish between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean, that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them by the hand of Moses. So because this follows the death of the two sons, there's a strong argument that this is exactly what they did. In other words, they went into the sanctuary under the influence of alcohol. And if they went into the sanctuary under the influence of alcohol, they might have been a little careless about things and kind of lax about things. Well, keep going, Bill. Alcohol has that effect. Intoxicants dull our senses. Right? That's why we have to be sober in the last days. That's why we have to be alert in the last days. That's why we need our senses in the last days. That's why we need to be filled with the Spirit in the last days, so that we can be attentive to all these things that are going on around us. Because the adversary, man, I don't think he sleeps nor slumbers either. All right? And he's always at work. And so we have to keep our wits about us. And I don't mean that we do this within our own power, but you understand we do have a responsibility to take care of what he's entrusted to us. Yes, be filled with his Spirit, be filled with his word and wisdom, but we still have to be sober-minded. We still have to be on guard and alert for things. We cannot allow intoxicants, any kind of an intoxicant. And I'm not just talking about natural, physical, liquid kind or things that come in a bottle. There's all kinds of intoxicants out there. And we cannot allow those things to provoke carelessness in us. So consider the words of Solomon about those who are given to too much wine. Proverbs 23, beginning in verse 30. Those who linger long at the wine. I like the way he puts that. Those who linger long. Those who go in search of mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly, because at the last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. And here's what I want to emphasize. Your eyes will see strange zara. Your eyes will see zara. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart will utter perverse things. So what is the point he's making? We can't afford to be intoxicated. Because when we are under the influence of intoxicants, don't think just Merlot here. Okay? Well, how does that? Anyway. All kinds of intoxicants that we need to be aware of. Right? Because if we are under the influence of these intoxicants, we will start to say perverse things. We will start to see strange things. And remember what that word means? To cause us to go astray, to turn aside out of the way from which we were in. So then, if we presume that Nadab and Abihu were under the influence of wine or some kind of alcohol, that means that they themselves were not able to discern the difference between holy and unholy, clean and unclean, much less to be able to demonstrate and to teach others the difference between clean and unclean. They couldn't teach that principle to the people because they didn't discern it themselves at that point in time. And so, going in that manner into the sanctuary, they kind of became a gateway or a potential gateway for profane things to enter into God's house. And God couldn't have that. Not going to stand. And so God acted, not out of cruelty. God acted out of holiness. So I want you to meditate upon that. These guys didn't have bad intentions. I don't think so. If they drank some wine or whatever it was before they went into the sanctuary, if that's what dulled their senses, I don't know. But whatever it was, whatever the motivation was, they were offering something that had the potential to be a gateway for other profane and unclean things to come in. And God had to shut that door. And he did it in very dramatic fashion. And again, not because he's cruel, but because he's holy. So let's go back to that thought once again. If we truly want to draw near to him, we must respect that he's holy. And his ways aren't ours. His thoughts are far beyond what we can comprehend. So we have to have his spirit to be able to discern his voice, to be balanced by his word, to know what it is we ought to do. So now, he acts out of holiness. So what we need to take away from that is, and I'm I don't want to ever say that God wouldn't do something like he did back then. I'm not going to say that. I'm really, Ananias and Sapphira. But anyway, here's the point I wanted to make. We need to glean from this, and what I want to glean from it today is, if we do not do our duty to guard our households, our families, if we don't do our duty to guard our congregation, our sacred space, that the Father has entrusted to us, if we don't do our duty and guard it, the Almighty will guard his holiness. He will shut the door to anything that might be a gateway for profane and unholy things to contaminate what is holy. Do you receive that? You hear that, okay? That should be basic principles. But then there's this thing called people. Flesh. Carnality, right? The cherubim were stationed in Genesis chapter 4. The cherubim were stationed at the eastern approach to the Garden of Eden. And do you know why he put the cherubim there? To guard the way to the tree of life. Right? They had the flaming sword. They were guarding the way to the tree of life. Why? Lest man, in his fallen state, take hold of the fruit and eat of it and live forever in a fallen state. Reading between the lines. But do you know why he had to put the cherubim there to guard the way to the tree of life? Because Adam didn't. Adam was told to guard it. Adam was the one that God placed there and delegated that responsibility and authority to. But when he didn't do it, and he let the serpent into the sacred space and start running his mouth to the point that his wife is listening, and now he's influenced. Because Adam didn't do it, God had to step in and do it himself. And he posted cherubim there to guard the way to the tree of life. He will guard his holiness. And if we really want to draw near and be part and commune with his presence, then we are going to have to respect that he is holy. It's not just a word. It's not just a warm, fuzzy thought. It is a reality, and he's serious about it. So then, I want to go back to this word zarah, this word that means strange or profane. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 10. When wisdom enters your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion will preserve you. Understanding will keep you, to deliver you from the way of evil, from the man who speaks perverse things, from those who leave the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perversity of the wicked, whose ways are crooked, and who are devious in their paths, to deliver you from the immoral, or some translations say strange, and that Hebrew word is zarah, to deliver you from the strange woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. So I wanted to read that passage because it uses the same word that is translated strange or profane in regard to the fire that Nadab and Abihu offered, which led to their destruction. That same word is used to describe this woman here. Same word. So here's my point. If it's the same word that's used to describe the fire offered by Aaron's sons, who may have been under the influence of intoxicants, which causes you, if you linger too long, causes you to see strange and profane things, right? Now it's used to describe an adulterous woman. a harlot. And here's why I find that to be of great importance to you and to me today. Revelation chapter 17. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication. And the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." And so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on the scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So here's why I read this. I hope you're stringing this together as we go along. Strange, profane, what its function is, what it does, why God has to close the door to that where his holiness is concerned, how it's tied to the idea of being under the influence of intoxicants, dulling our senses, causing us to see things that are profane and strange, and now used to define a woman or to describe a woman who has turned away from her husband, so to speak, and has gone and played the harlot. She's profane, she's strange in that way. So this woman is described by John as being a harlot. She's also described by the Greek term gune, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's my understanding that that word doesn't just mean woman, but can also infer wife. But this woman, whoever she is, she carries a golden cup, and it says it's full of abominations. And it's my understanding that abominations are things that are detestable to God. Would that be an accurate perception? That these abominations are things that are detestable to God. Well, that's what's in this cup. And the Bible tells us that she has committed fornication with the kings of the earth, with the leaders of the world. That fornication, as far as I'm concerned, is addressing, since we have little ones here, I'll try to be as delicate as I know how. But if this woman is someone's wife, she should only receive the seed of her husband. She should not be mingling the seed of others with the seed of her husband. But that's what she's done. So I take this to mean that this is representative of the fact that there have been, continue to be, and until the end of the age, there will be those who profess him, but will take his word and mix it with that, and this, and that, and all these things, and all the things that the leaders of this world are pouring out there, and they're just pushing at us, and all these things, and those things have a way of finding their way into the community of God's people. There are gateways that let those things in. And I've been guilty of it. You've been guilty of it. We've all been guilty of it. You know it's true. Every one of us, to some degree or the other, if not now, in times past, we have been guilty of these things because we're in this world. We're infected by this world. We're affected by this world. That's why it's so important for us to hear the call to come out of this world and not partake of the world and what they value and what they put, what they make so important to us. To hear the call. And that goes back to the idea, if we really want to approach him, then we're going to have to respect his holiness, which means there's more and more stuff that we're going to have to die to, right? All right, y'all still with me? Okay. So this is what her fornication represents as far as I'm concerned. She mingles truth, or she represents those who mingle truth with falsehood, holy and profane, which is why I believe Babylon is plastered on her forehead, because that's what Babylon is all about. That's how she thinks, and that's why it's on her forehead. Because if you think that way, you're going to act that way. All right? But as it relates to what we're focusing on today, her cup is filled with abominations. And I'm going to suggest to you that those abominations are symbolized by the wine of her fornication. And if you linger too long at the wine, what happens? Bad stuff happens, right? So this wine of her fornication is in this golden cup, which in turn, according to John, causes other people to be intoxicated with her same way of thinking. How she's thinking, again, is determining what she does. Well, that's swirling around in that cup, and there are people who are hanging around that cup too long, and how she thinks is starting to influence how others think. And when they start thinking the way she thinks, they start doing the things she starts doing, that she's been guilty of doing. And so the whole world is made drunk with the wine of her fornication. You understand what I'm saying here? In other words, it is possible for God's people to be intoxicated with things other than Cabernet. It is possible for God's people to be intoxicated with things that don't come in a bottle. I would say some of those things that I'm referring to are even more dangerous than those things. But we can be intoxicated with those things if we are not careful. Being very plain, thoughts, ideologies, teachings. Yeah, like you name it. There's a lot of different things. But these things that we have in our life that are gateways to allow all these other philosophies and ideologies and teachings, because let's face it, I think it's written somewhere, hey, and I'm going to paraphrase it, you better test those spirits to see if they're really of God, because false prophets have gone out into the world. All right. So then, just because it's served in a golden cup doesn't mean it's holy. Just because it looks good doesn't mean it's God. In fact, it could be just as profane as a golden calf. So then, Nadab and Abihu, at some point, whatever their motivation, whatever happened, how much wine they drank, whatever it was, at some point, they went into the sanctuary and they must have concluded that what they were doing was okay. Something convinced them that it was okay. And had they gotten away with that, you know what other people would have done, right? They would have done the same thing. Okay? My friend Mark McClendon, he has this little philosophy. Maybe I'll use that word, which says that if I showed up with holes and tears in my jeans, next week Celso would show up wearing shorts and flip-flops. I'm using him as an example, not that he wishes to do that. Point is that if I let the standards drop, somebody else will take it to the next level. And then the person after that will take it to the next level. If God had allowed Nadab and Abihu to get away with this, you know exactly what those other priests would have done. And then the ensuing generations would have done that. And even though he didn't let them get away with it, guess what ensuing generations did anyhow? So there has to be a standard. God would not allow that. He could not allow that. And so that's one of the reasons that they were consumed with fire. By the way, the harlot in Revelation chapter 17 is burned with fire. So in other words, let's be certain that the fire you bring in here is acceptable in God's eyes, not just yours. It goes for me. It goes for all of us. I want you to consider something, and we talked about this a little bit last year during this tour portion, but it bears mentioning again. In our humanity, it is very easy for us to allow our thoughts to become God's thoughts. I thought it, therefore, God told me that. Right? Filter. Beth and I have been in ministry 30 plus years at this point, right? Something like that. I have met through those 30 years so many people, not just here, other places. Oh, we're so glad to be here. God has led us here. God told us to come here. God brought us here. Da, 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 da. Something happens, they get offended. Well, God's telling us we need to move on. I'm like, that was just 3 weeks ago. God told you to come here. He changed his mind that fast? Well, I guess so. He's telling us this now. I'm like, God really changes his mind a lot, which is kind of weird considering he says, I am the Lord, I change not. God told me to do this. God told me to do that. Really? Because God didn't tell me that. God told me the exact opposite of what you're saying he's telling you. So what do we do with that? Somebody's wrong, if not both of them. My point is, sometimes we convince ourselves that what is in our soul is God telling us these things. I mean, there are times something will pop up and I'll wonder if that's the Lord. And I'm like, all right, you're going to have to convince me it's you. Because I don't trust me. I don't trust, some of the things that go on in my head sometimes. So if that's really you speaking, you're going to have to really impress this upon me. And there are times that I do feel very impressed about something, and then I'll speak up. But my point is that all of us need to be aware that we can't allow our soulish man to convince us that God is telling us to do this, that, and the other. I'm going to give you a very, very extreme example of what I'm talking about. Beth and I, many years ago, not here, but many years ago, we had a woman tell us that God told her to leave her husband to marry another man. Now, that's an extreme example. But the point is, if we are not careful, we can convince ourselves that God is telling us things that God hadn't said anything to. They went in and offered fire that they were convinced they were supposed to do, but God had not commanded this. So God doesn't speak out of both sides of his mouth. So where is the problem? It's with us. So not everything our soul works up in our mind is a message from God. I mean, the Blues Brothers thought that they were on a mission from God. And they were heathens. Anyway, so how do we resolve this issue? God's telling you this, God's telling me that, and they're kind of in conflict. How do we resolve that? Well, obviously we have to go to the Word. But we also need to consider godly order, how God does things. God spoke to Adam, Adam spoke to Cain and Abel, right? We need to understand how God does things, his order, and how he works through those in authority. In your house, the head of the home. Your children should not be telling you, the head of the home, how the house is to be run. That is chaos. That is not order. And God's not going to bless that. You have to get that in order. With all due respect to the ladies, whom we love and appreciate and value your role in the kingdom. The way he set it up was that husband and that father was to be head of the house and to set things in order. And you right alongside of him doing that. Is that an amen, ladies? All right. Okay. So then, those who are the head of the house are expected to be the head of the house and to teach those in the house under your care how things are to be done, and particularly when it comes to things that pertain to the kingdom of heaven. Adam taught Cain. Adam taught Abel. Abel complied. Cain, he turned away out of the path that he had been placed upon. So don't let our opinions compel us to offer what is unacceptable to God. How does that relate to what I just said? If things are out of order at home, we need to get things in order at home, and then we come. Then we present. Then we minister. Then we do those things. If our house was out of order, do you think he'd let me go on doing what I'm doing? How about this side of the room? If my house was out of order, do you think he'd let me continue? Do you think he might send an unnamed prophet and say, hey, pal, what do you think? Yes, he will. So I want you to understand something. Well, am I getting too long-winded? Good, because I got a little more I want to say. Some of you know us really well, and some of you kind of know us, casually at a distance. And, the size of the congregation makes it impossible to know everybody very intimately. But for those who know me and my wife, I believe that they would testify that if Bill was out of order, that'd be the first one raising Cain right there. Those of you who know my wife, can you verify that? She don't let me get away with nothing. Nothing. As it should be, that's right. Right. And even when she's wrong, nothing. That's right. But beyond that, there are men in this congregation, there are elders in this congregation, there are others in this congregation that I have made myself accountable to. And I have charged them, you see me step out of line, you step up and say something. There are people in my life that I talk to, I make myself accountable to. My point is, my house needs to be in order, but guess what? Your house needs to be in order. Your house needs to be in order as well. So that when we come and to offer him, and to bring that offering to him, that it is deemed acceptable. Right? So in a congregational setting, we also have to consider God's order, God's structure. We have to respect those who are in authority. I know that I'm one of those people, but it still doesn't change anything. It's not the person, it's the purpose, it's the principle. We have to respect those who are in authority. We have to respect the boundaries that have been established. Let me put it to you this way. This is not a democracy. That might unsettle some, I don't know. But we don't do things here by the will of the people. To the best we know how, we're trying to do things according to his will. And then we lead others in that. Now, does that agitate you? The people who it would are not going to respond. But you need to ask yourself, does that agitate me? Do I have a problem with that? Do I have a problem with the structure here? I want you to consider this, getting a little personal now. What the Father wishes to do here might not be what he's doing there. All right? So if you come here, get on board with what he's doing here, not what they're doing there. Can you receive that? If he told you to come here, then he has called you to endure the good and the bad. Because I got news for you. There ain't nowhere to run that you ain't going to run into people. And if you run into people, you're just going to have to deal with it. It's fight or flight. All right? So if he called you here, he has called you to endure the good and the bad. If he called you here, he has called you to be able to rise above the frailty of mere men and women and focus on his purpose and what he's doing. If he called you here, don't bring strange fire into the assembly. All right? Don't bring in the fire that appeals to you, because it might not fit what the Father wants to do here. It might be great over there, but that might not be what he wants to do right here. It's like, you got beams and bars and screens and hooks and clasps and altars and arcs and you got all these different things. And there was a reason for it all. But you don't confuse what one is supposed to do with what the other is supposed to do, because that creates confusion, that creates discord. And so I'm going to suggest to you that it's very, very possible that this congregation may not be exactly like your last congregation. And I know that some of you go, hallelujah. Okay? Some of you may think, I wish it was like the last congregation. It may not ever be like your last congregation. It's possible that we're not going to be what you think a congregation should be. People. Okay? And all people are unique. And so if you are finding yourself struggling with what we are, figure out why. Figure out why. And I don't say that to be, I hope I don't come across as being ugly. I just want everybody to be where they're supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to be doing so the body can function the way it's supposed to function. That's the honest truth, okay? And while I'm on this, let's go ahead and say this. Are y'all good? Don't bring into this congregation what destroyed that last one you were at. Well, I'm in the thick of it now, so here we go. There are teachings, and even some teachers, that I have not endorsed, and for a reason. And it is not because I feel like I'm the only one worth listening to. That's not the reason. I admit I am not the most learned teacher out there. There are people who know stuff I will never, ever, 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 ever know. So that's not the reason. But I don't keep up with everything that's out there. I think it's impossible at this point, especially with the internet, right? I mean, you don't have time to do it. I know you don't have time to do it because you say, hey, will you listen to this and tell me what you think? Translation, will you do all the work and then just give me the cliff notes on it? It's impossible to vet everything that's being said out there and what every ministry is up to. And if we cannot vet them properly, we're not going to allow that fire in here. Does that mean that it's bad? Not necessarily. It just means that we're going to guard what the Father has entrusted to us. And I hope it doesn't offend you for me to say that, but it is impossible for us to vet every teaching, every teacher, every ministry, every website. It is impossible. And until we can and be okay with that, we're not going to let that fire in here. I don't know what you translate that as being, but in my book, that's just wisdom. And here's why. Because me and her will have to stand before him and give an account. Who you listen to is your business. But don't presume to bring that fire in here. And especially without talking to us. Okay? But it blesses me. Oh, hallelujah. I'm glad it blesses you. But unless we can vet and make sure that that is appropriate, don't just presume to bring that fire in here. If there is an agenda to bring fire in because you think, well, this is what we need to do as a congregation. Well, you're entitled to your opinion, but you might want to come and talk to us because the way the order works is he speaks to us and then it kind of filters out from there. Well, are you saying we can't have an opinion? No, of course you're going to have an opinion. She has a different opinion than I do on a lot of stuff. Nothing. No, we have differing opinions. There's people I love dearly. We have different opinions about some things. We're always going to have different opinions on things. However, when our opinion becomes an agenda, we've crossed a line. And that might put us in conflict with one another. And so what I'm trying to do here today is avoid that because we want to be one, right? Are y'all hearing me here? Is this coming around? Am I good? Am I all right? No. I am determined that we're going to guard what the Father is doing here. And so that means that I will not knowingly allow certain intoxicants and influences to come in and to disrupt what the Father is doing here. On the app, either. The live stream, either. Okay? Boundaries are meant to define what is clean and unclean, what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. If I haven't been real enough with you already, can I get real with you? It's getting quieter and quieter every time I ask that question. Y'all okay over here? Y'all okay? Let me see. You all right? You okay? You good? Y'all good over here? Jerry, am I okay? All right, if Jerry says I'm okay, I'm probably okay. Am I okay over here? All right, am I okay over here? All right. 3 of you. Okay, all right. Let me just tell you something. I don't like slick. You know what I mean by that? I don't like slick because it reminds me of the snake. You know, in the first introduction we have of the serpent, he's in there slithering into the sacred space, which he's not supposed to be there. And what is he doing? He's using that silver tongue of his, right? Because he's working an agenda. He's trying to lay a snare and a trap. And so I don't like slick because it reminds me of snakes. Well, Bill, there are some snakes that have a good purpose. Not if you're on the menu for the night. If you're the dinner plan, that vulnerable one with the little mouse, he doesn't care if it's a good snake or a bad snake. It's a snake, and it's trying to eat me, right? So whether it's death by poison or death by constriction, it's still death. My point is, we need to guard the sacred space. And let's don't be carried away by slick. Be discerning. Be filled with the Spirit of God and wisdom. And be discerning. Why am I telling you this? Because what is the number one enemy that God's people will have in the last days? Deception. When the Antichrist does his thing, you know, everybody's going to know who the Antichrist is, but the point is he gets to that place through deception. And if it were possible, even the elect would be deceived. I don't want to be one of those who are deceived. All right? So let's be careful about these things. In this Torah portion, there is a list of what is clean to eat and the things that we're not supposed to eat. And you know what people do? They still justify why I can eat this and why I can have that. Right? Even though God put a list, here's clean, this is unclean, this is good for you, this isn't good for you. I mean, that's the very thing that happened in the beginning. You can eat from this tree, you can eat it from all those trees, but this one tree, don't eat from it. You eat, you're going to die. Oh, like moth to the flame. Right? Why do we do that? We justify what our soul speaks to us. We convince ourselves that God's telling me to do that. By the way, I think that there are things far more deadly to a believer than a pork chop dinner. Ideas, philosophies, ideologies, these things. That's why we have to be sober and not be intoxicated. What intoxicates us? Things that have gold, pearls, scarlet, things that look good, sound good, but if it doesn't mean it's God. All right? Speaking of swine, you've heard me refer to this Jewish idiom, a pig's foot. Everybody remember what a pig's foot is? It's an idiomatic phrase for a hypocrite. Why? Well, because if a pig's laying on its side and its hooves are pointed toward you, what are you going to see? Cloven hoof. Oh, that looks clean. But on a little closer inspection, what do we discover? It doesn't chew its cud. So it is an expression that is alerting us that just because it looks clean on the outside doesn't mean that it's clean on the inside. And yet we justify and we eat it anyway. And we take these things into our lives. And I'm not just talking about pork chops and stuff like that. Now I'm talking about philosophies and ideologies and a way of thinking and all this stuff. And we take it in and we justify why it's okay because it looks good on the outside. It must be good on the inside. But then we take these things in and then we ourselves are rendered unclean. In our Torah portion, it tells us that if an unclean thing like a mouse dies and falls into an earthen vessel, it's not just the what's in there. It's the earthen vessel itself. It becomes unclean. Why? Because being an earthen vessel, clay, it absorbs that uncleanness. It absorbs those contaminants. It infiltrates, and the vessel's rendered unclean, and then it has to be broken. I don't want to be a contaminated vessel. I do not want to be broken in that sense. I want my heart to be broken, so he can renew in me a right spirit, so that I will be the man, that you will be the person that he's called us to be, pure and holy, right? So I'm going to close with this, and here's why we're discussing this. Once again, if we truly want to approach a holy God, then we have to respect his holiness. And we have to remember that some offerings are just not acceptable to him. They might be fine to us, but they may not be good with him. And it really matters what's good with him, right? Let's remember not to allow our soulish inclinations to become our voice of God. Because if we allow that, we might end up like Nadab and Abihu, offering strange fire. Offering things that it looks like what we were doing yesterday, we're practicing for, but something happened. Our senses were dulled. We have to be very guarded about these kinds of things for our homes and for this congregation. It is our duty to guard what is holy. And if we don't do that, God will guard his holiness. And here's what will happen. He'll shut the door here, and he'll raise up somebody else who will do it. I believe that he's calling us to a higher standard than what we've been accustomed to in times past. The standard was always there. Don't misunderstand me. It's just in the days in which we live, it's time for us to get busy. It's time for us to get serious. It's time for us to do the things that we know to do, because it's not just that he might appear, he is going to appear. And if he shows up, we need to be ready. And so then if you have been drawn to be part of what God is doing here, then you need to know that there is going to be a cost. It's costing a lot of people a lot of things right now. It's going to cost every one of us something. But that's what God's called us to be. And you said you wanted to be part of his presence. You wanted to draw near to him. You feel like you've been brought here for that reason. Well, it's going to all cost us something. It's going to cost us a lot. And it's really important that you know that and to understand what he's doing here, so that we will not be tempted to present strange fire.